Sam Shepard is an internationally recognized expert in many areas. He's a chemist, he's a scientist, he's a discoverer, and as I mentioned last week, he has discovered a natural ingredient that cures cancer. And with that, I think with all of you, with your jaws dropping open, I'm going to introduce, and please help me welcome Sam Shepard.
Thank you, Colin. I'm going to start out with a story. It's closer to why I got involved in this in the first place. In 2003, I got diagnosed with a very rare cancer. Has anyone heard of polycythemia vera? It's an incurable, untreatable cancer. It's a bone cancer. Increases the hemoglobin levels in your bloodstream. And the doctor came in. I was having AFib, high blood pressure, and a enlarged heart. I couldn't figure out what was causing it. Came in and he said, "I got some bad news." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "You've got polycythemia vera." And I said, "What the hell is that?" And he said, "It's an incurable, untreatable cancer." And I said, "Can we do chemo or radiation?" And he just shook his head no. And at that time, I said, "Well, how much time do I have?" He said, "You've got 10 minutes to 10 years. 97% of the people with the JAK2 mutation, which is what I had, 97% usually perish within 10 years. And I said, "What about the 10 minutes? He said, "In your current condition, you could have a blood clot to the brain, to the lung, or to the heart, and it would take you 10 minutes to die." I don't remember paying, I don't remember leaving the office, but I woke up about 3 or 4 days later, as clear as anything. It said, "Go find those animals that don't get cancer." And I found 5. Salmon, pink flamingos, sharks, elephants, and mole rats. And at that time, I was working for the Department of Defense in San Diego on a project there. Scripps Oceanographic was involved. They looked at those 5 animal tissue and they found a common molecule across those species. It's called astaxanthin. So with that, I began taking astaxanthin at about 4 milligrams a day. Began growing it in my backyard. Remember those Intex pools you see in Field and Stream? You blow them up and you can use them as hot tubs. That was what we first grew it in. And I had to be bled just about every month. So it became and I just could monitor my hemoglobin and could tell pretty much when I had to go in and have a phlebotomy done. So then it became every 2 months. Then I went to 12 milligrams and it became every 4 months. And I had no side effects. And I said, well, 12 works, 100 ought to work better. So I started taking 100 milligrams, and sure enough, I no longer have to be bled. My hemoglobin runs about 15.7, where historically it was 20 to 24. And I could feel it. I mean, I knew that my blood was thickening up. So that's how I figured out about astaxanthin. So I wrote a paper. I had done quite a bit of research over the last 12 years on this, and I began to provide it to my family and friends. And one of my friends, Lori, I'm not going to give you her last name, but she had inflammatory breast cancer, and MD Anderson had sent her home with 2 to 4 months, told her to get her affairs in order. And she called me and said, "You're working on this." Now, I had moved from Houston to Charleston to put a facility in at the Navy Yard. So we were growing this algae at the Navy Yard here in Charleston. At that time, we could only sell it overseas and provide it overseas. It wasn't approved in the U.S. at the concentrations that we needed it to be. So I began to give it to her and told her, "Don't you say anything to anybody." We could throw me in prison, I guess. But sure enough, 3 days after she started taking it, her white blood count came back up. She went in on Monday, had blood work done. Tuesday, her pathologist called her and said, your white blood count is back up. Thursday, they scheduled her for emergency mastectomy. But he said, I got some bad news. You have a tumor in your lung and you have a tumor in your brain. And he said he would deal with that after the surgery with chemo and radiation. And that she would, well, she denied the chemo and the radiation. 23 days later, the tumor in her lung, after she'd been on this, I put her on a massive dose, about 3,000 milligrams a day, pretty high dose. And 23 days later, the tumor in her lung was gone. 48 days later, the tumor in her brain was gone. And she's still alive to this day. This happened in 2013, I think. Yeah. So with that, then we began to look at this, and I began to provide this, this to family and friends, primarily for cancer treatment. And you probably heard of two drugs, Keytruda and Opdivo. They were both developed from this molecule. And there's no money in Astaxanthin because it's a natural occurring material, but there's a lot of money in the Keytruda and Opdivo markets. The problem with Keytruda and Opdivo, they both have side effects. Astaxanthin does not. You can't patent Astaxanthin. But if you develop a synthetic molecule, you can patent that. So you can understand where it was going. This is what is a normal cell. You see the cell membrane there. These proteins are expressed inside and outside the cell. Normal cell is about a 7.35, 7.4 pH, has a minus 70 millivolt charge across it. That's what gives the cell its life. And that's governed based on sodium and potassium levels. This is why salt is extremely important in your diet. In a healthy cell, you have more potassium inside the cell than you do on the outside. You have more sodium outside the cell. That difference in those metals create an electric potential, a voltage. And every cell operates off of that voltage. And that electric potential will cycle between minus 70 millivolts and plus 33 millivolts in an activity that allows your cell to live. In cancer cells, we find something totally different. We find a huge accumulation of sodium inside the cell, almost equal to that outside the cell. All cancer cells, 100%, we have now found out are anaerobic, which means without oxygen. Your normal cells require oxygen. Anaerobic cells are anaerobic, and their primary food source is sugar, the same as making beer or wine. When a cancer cell goes anaerobic, it secretes a ligand. It's called PD-L1. Let's see if this will work. This is PD-L1 here. This is the tumor cell. This is your immune system, your T cell. But this ligand will be secreted by all tumor cells based on its anaerobic activity, its behavior. On your T cell, you have PD-1. If PD-1 touches PD-L1, this cell runs away and won't fight the tumor cell. That's why cancer will not be fought by your immune system because of this. This is Keytruda, for example, reacts right to the end of that PD-L1 and inhibits the turnoff of the T cell. These are the cancers that so far are all what's called PD-L1 expressed cancers. That's the level of expression of PD-L1. All of these cancers, some of them are very aggressive. The bad news is these cancers are aggressive. The good news is these cancers are aggressive. Because the more aggressive, the more they respond to that PD-L1 turnoff. I can turn that PD-L1 off. This This is what the molecule looks like. It has these are all double bonded. You can see those there. Highly reactive. They readily absorb electrons and inactivate what's called free radical or reactive oxygen species. The ends of this, here and here, have two reactive groups, extremely reactive groups. And it turns out that it looks like a dumbbell. The bar part of that dumbbell is exactly the length of a cell membrane. So you have that one head of the astaxanthin sticking out of the cell and the other head sticking inside the cell. Here's how it inactivates the cancer. This is a T cell here, a tumor cell here. When this T cell comes down to sniff that peptide that's resting right there to identify this cell, this PD-1 fits perfectly on the PD-L1 and it turns off the T cell. T cell flies away, doesn't try to kill the tumor cell. Astaxanthin, because of its reactivity, sticks to PD-L1. Now this connection can't be made. This thing comes in and sniffs it. You see the little dendritic action of the T cell. Out of each one of these will come stomach acid, very low pH acids. It will target that cell and dissolve that cell. That's how we believe it works. Here's how the astaxanthin resides in the cell membrane itself and how it electrostatically attaches to the PD-L1 and PD-L2 of tumor cells. Here's what we've been able to uncover chemically, biochemically, as to how the astaxanthin reacts. Here's the astaxanthin molecule. It's dumbbell shape. This reactive group here attaches through what's called hydrogen bridging or hydrogen bonding right directly to that OH of the PD-L1 on the tumor. This end is electrostatically attached into that area, and it blocks the reactivity of PD-L1 from turning off a T cell. Now, when this happened, we began primarily to do this for cancer, and the cancer people began to report that their tumors were not only decreasing, they were disappearing. Colorectal, no side effects. She stated that her arthritis had gone away. She had no pain in her joints. And the reason is, when I contacted a friend of mine at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, he asked me if I'd ever heard of what's called a human disease tree, and I said, no, this is the best way I could show it. All of these diseases are non-bacterial, non-viral, typically. They're inflammatory. It's when your immune system goes completely out of control is what causes these diseases. As we get older, our ability to stop free radical formation in our bodies diminish greatly. So you have a very high probability of having dementia disorders, cancer, arthritis, cardiovascular, lupus. Doctors typically treat the tips of those branches. So if someone comes in and says, I have an arthritis issue, that doctor treats that symptom. What Dr. Williams told me was that astaxanthin is dealing at the ROS level, at the reactive oxygen species level, the trunk of that tree. And what's happened is that all of those diseases seem to be affected from a single dose of the astaxanthin. We generate reactive oxygen species as a daily process of metabolism. Stress causes it. Anytime a hormone, adrenaline, for example, or estrogen or progesterone is metabolized in your body, one of the byproducts are reactive oxygen species. Those species will go in and can mutate the DNA of a normal cell. someone who's getting chemo or radiation for cancer, it's not the chemo drug and it's not the radiation that's going to fix the cancer. When you get those compounds generate reactive oxygen species. There's 4 of them. There's superoxide, singlet oxygen, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxide. Those 4 contribute to over 92% of all disease in human beings. It's non-bacterial, non-viral, or non-parasitic. 4 reactive oxygen species that Western medicine is not teaching. They're aware of it, but Western medicine treats the effects of those diseases. We happen to think that we're now dealing with the trunk of that tree. For the first time, we're able to talk about a cure for cancer. You're going to hear about it more and more on the news. That, to date, has not been something that people ever wanted to talk about. Dr. Oz, by the way, just got sued for talking about a cure for diabetes. But that's what we think the astaxanthin is actually attacking, is the ROS, or the trunk of the human disease tree. People who are under stress pump out a lot of adrenaline and cortisol. Those hormones and steroids have to be metabolized. Well, the byproduct is reactive oxygen species. Reactive oxygen species create what's called interleukin-1 beta, which is the inflammatory response. It causes you to sweat, might give you hives. It's an immune response. When that happens, that in itself generates more ROS. And it's what we refer to as auto-acceleration. You're auto-accelerating yourself into a huge inflammatory issue that your body is totally out of control at that point. So antioxidants or free radical scavengers would help, and astaxanthin is one of those. These are the reactive oxygen species here. The ones with the little red dots are highly reactive. They can zoom in and hit the DNA and mutate the DNA. With chemo and radiation, they zoom into the DNA of a cancer cell and they kill the cell. Whenever you take chemo and radiation, there's about an 18% chance that you'll represent cancer in 2 to 5 years. The reason being is that they just generated a huge amount of ROS that has just converted normal cells in your body into cancer cells that will represent in 2 to 5 years. So be very, very cautious as to how you deal with this. Current chemo and radiation buys you time. When the cancer usually represents, it's even more virulent and more fatal. Here's a slide as to how it works. There's several things that might cause the mutations, but ROS is the primary one. And it moves through all of these different phases until finally, you may not even know you have cancer. Everybody's generating cancer probably on a daily basis. There's a cell that's gone anaerobic because of a lack of oxygen. For whatever reason, it could be alcohol consumption with peroxide formation in your liver. It could be marathon runners that generate lactic acid. Anytime you generate an anaerobic condition, you have a high probability of one of those cells becoming anaerobic, secreting PD-L1, turning off your immune system, and in 5 to 30 years, it will present as a cancer. Not everybody can get away with it. This is the vicious cycle of oxidative stress. You have inflammation, you have tissue damage generates more ROS generates more inflammation generates more ROS generates tissue damage, until finally you're totally overwhelmed with MS, for example, is one that comes out. But inflammation, joint pain, swelling, water retention, all of those are inflammatory responses from ROS. here's a list of dietary antioxidants. You can see ground cloves, spice. Turmeric is the one that's being touted now because of it's called ORAC score. It's oxygen radical absorption capacity. These are a measure of their antioxidant effects. Gives you some idea of where astaxanthin fits in that score. That's why we see the response so quickly. I do every day. We actually provide it worldwide now in milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and milk chocolate. It works really well. We also have it in an oil form that you just put on a piece of bread and eat it if you tolerate the seaweed flavor. Yeah, go ahead.
How does it impact someone with dementia?
It's more of a preventative. One of the things that happens with dementia, and I've worked on a couple projects, one with MIT, where we developed an electromagnetic device that activates microglia in the brain and eats the amyloid protein. One of the things that we're finding with dementia is that there's a low level, and I'm going to talk about MS because it sort of fits in that same category a little bit, but Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Alzheimer's, we stop the disease. Parkinson's, we get some reversal. I've got probably, I would say 11 Parkinson's patients had their driver's license removed because of their tremors. A couple of those were having hallucinations, and sleep pattern disruption. Within 7 days of being on this, their tremors stopped. That was news. That was, their hallucinations stopped and their ability to sleep through the night improved. So we know that it has an effect. Now, if it's the astaxanthin or it's the lipid, the oil that the astaxanthin is dissolved in, because both of those cross the blood-brain barrier. So one of the things we find in dementia patients is that the buildup of what's called amyloid beta protein, which is the plaque, the Alzheimer's plaque, appears to be caused from reactive oxygen species. It's an immune disorder. So when amyloid protein in the brain, it's all sort of wadded up, but when it sees these free radicals, it unfolds. Now, more amyloid plaque begins to crystallize as a seed on that molecule, until finally you have these plaques that are stuck around the neuron. It takes about 4 months to a year for that neuron to die, depending on the aggressiveness of it. Once the neuron is gone in Alzheimer's, you can't get it back. With Parkinson's, though, we see the first indications are decreased electrical signals. So anything we can catch in that 4 to 12 month period, we can get the plaque eaten by the microglia, which are, this is really going to be disgusting because everybody now is going to know that you have little amoebas in your brain, little cells in there that are eating the waste products that's being generated from cellular disruption. And the problem as we get older, our energy level drops. And that energy of that microglia goes into what's called stasis, which means it goes stationary. It doesn't search for anything to eat, it's just laying in there. What MIT did is they figured out how to put an electromagnetic pulse, but they could activate it at a certain frequency and the microglia would come alive and begin eating the amyloid plaque. And that's why we saw the recoveries. But I contacted them and I said, I have a device that I can put the pulse through the eye down to the occipital lobe of the brain, and it's dissipated across the brain at a certain frequency, and sure enough, it activated the microglia. And they stopped the progression of Alzheimer's, and they reversed, in some cases, Parkinson's. MS is a little different. MS is an overactive microglia, which means that there's not enough fat and oil in the brain to keep the microglia happy. So the microglia begin to eat the myelin around the axon of the nerve. That's the insulating material from the cell body down to its connections, synaptic gaps. Well, when it begins to eat that myelin, the electrical pulses get disrupted. And you begin to see less motor strength in the MS. You might lose your voice. There's several things that happen as a result of it. So what we do in that case is we feed it lipids. Astaxanthin is loaded with lipids, but the astaxanthin also stops the inflammatory response that's causing that in the first place in the brain. So there's two edges, and we're not clear which one has the most effect. In combination with the light, then we see this thing reverse. This is having an effect way beyond anything I ever envisioned, but we're staying on it because it's pointing us in a very unique condition. This is not something taught. Are there doctors here? In medical school, they look at the disease and the symptom of that, and they treat that. You're probably aware of reactive oxygen species and its impact on inflammatory disease, but nobody deals with eradicating the reactive oxygen species. This is a whole new field, and sure enough, it seems to work. The effects of astaxanthin inhibits PDL1, PDL2 deactivation of T cells. That's what we were doing from a cancer point of view. But we find all these other benefits from it. Salt appears to be the largest cause of anaerobic cellular conversion. Anything that causes cellular hypoxia. Smoking cigarettes, it's not the nicotine, could be the tar, it's the carbon monoxide. That's what is creating a hypoxic nature at the cellular level. Salt, fresh water, you may be perfectly fine with a 96 or 98% oxygen solubility in your bloodstream. It's a gas measurement. The problem is getting the oxygen from your capillary into the cell. It has to go through interstitial fluid. The saltier that fluid is, the less oxygen solubility there is in that fluid. For example, fresh water has an oxygen solubility of 14 parts per million. That's what a fish uses when it's freshwater. Salt water is 4 parts per million. So the more salt you take in, the more salty water, your body, the solution to pollution is dilution. Always remember that. Colin knows that one very well. Your body will pump fluid in to try to dilute the sodium level inside the body. So you swell up, you do water retention. Now becomes the real problem in getting the oxygen from your capillary through that salty water into the cell that's needed it. And if the cell's not getting enough oxygen for whatever reason, it'll go anaerobic. It only has two choices. It'll go into what's called apoptosis, which is cell death, or it'll convert into an anaerobic cell. And the only requirement for an anaerobic cell is sugar. And as long as it can get a source of sugar. I've heard a lot of people, and I've been asked this question a lot, well, if you stop eating sugar, won't that kill the cancer? No. The reason being is a cancer cell has 10 to 20 times more insulin receptors in the cell membrane than a normal cell. So if you start cutting sugar out of your diet, the tumor cell is going to be fat, dumb, and happy, while all of your other cells are going to be deficient in sugar, and they're going to die and you're going to lose weight. Your brain's going to be affected. Your brain's a huge user of glucose. Your tumor cell, by its unique structure, becomes priority. That's why cancer patients lose weight. They'll start converting protein to try to get sugar to the cells that are starving of sugar, but your cancer cells are doing fine. That's 10 times more capacity to take sugar out of your blood than a normal cell. That is a That's a big issue. So if someone says, well, cut sugar out, no, you're only going to kill your normal cells. Yeah, we all need dessert. Velasta is the product that we make, and it's in chocolate, it's in oil, but this gives you some idea on the ORAC score. You'd have to equivalent get 1,270 cups of blueberries to equal one 1-inch square of Velasta. A square, there's a chocolate bar, Colin has one. A chocolate bar is 9 inches by 4 inches. There's 28 segments, 1-inch segments on that bar. And
Pass them out.
yeah.
And what this cost me?
It's each square has 24 milligrams of pure astaxanthin in it. I think that's where you were going. That's equivalent to eating 2.5 pounds of salmon every day. Your caloric intake for the salmon itself probably precludes you from doing that. 10 pounds of shrimp. Now, I can do that. And here's the dosage levels from what we've been able to decipher so far that have a positive response. Prevention is just one 1-inch square a day. And when we start someone up on arthritis, diabetes, and cancer, we want to ramp you up, very similar to the way steroids work. We want every cell in your body to be saturated with astaxanthin. It is lipid soluble, which means it has a tendency to bioaccumulate. It's what turns salmon pink, pink flamingos pink, shrimp pink, lobster pink. That's the molecule that does it. So what we do is we start out with 4 segments a day. So one 28-segment bar lasts you 1 week. Then you look at your symptoms. For example, in arthritis, after about 3 to 7 days, your pain goes away. That's how dramatic this is. Once your pain goes away, you drop back to 3 segments a day. You wait 3 days. It takes 72 hours to see an effect up and down on either side of this. So after 72 hours, you're at 3 segments, you back off to 2. If your pain still stays away, we have no one below 2. As soon as you drop to 2 or to 1, normally they see the pain return, they bump it to 3, and the pain goes away. So we're fine-tuning, and it depends on body weight. It's typically 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight is the way we do it, but sometimes it's not easy to ask people what they weigh.
What is the FDA?
The FDA just gave us grass, which is generally regarded as safe. And we petitioned about a year ago that for terminally ill patients, they should be allowed to do this. Well, Trump signed that about 45 days ago. So it's not regulated any longer by the FDA. You can do whatever you want to do with this. It's a natural occurring supplement, and it's not regulated now. Yes?
Are there any side effects to the dosages?
We've all eaten, so I hope we have, because there's no physical side effects at all. The only side effect is that if you start out with a high dose, your body, the enzymes in your small bowel are not tuned in to absorb it all. So what you see is a red stool. After that, it's not blood, and you'll notice how red this stuff really is. After about 7 days, the red stool goes away, and your body is now secreting more enzymes in your small bowel to absorb it. So your absorption efficiency goes up dramatically within about 7 days. It's just overwhelming. You've heard of beta carotene. Yeah, go ahead.
So does it affect the hormones or testosterone in the body for either men or women?
No, but if the testosterone is inflammatory, the lower levels of testosterone testosterone are caused from an inflammatory response, it would help. We've got some, actually ladies, where their hair's growing back. And it's because of the inflammatory, stress-related inflammatory response in the hair follicles, we think. But they're actually experiencing hair growth. So anything that is caused by an inflammatory response, lupus is a good example. Go ahead.
Based on the chart you have up there now,
Mm-hmm.
if I ate 1 square day prevention, I would not get arthritis, diabetes, just by eating 1 square a day?
Yeah, after, it takes a little longer to build it up at 1 square per day, but after about 60 days of doing that, you're saturated.
Okay.
So from that point on, your probability of getting any inflammatory type disease drops dramatically. So getting dementia, getting cancer, fibromyalgia, lupus, it
3
would...
bars a day?
No, I didn't.
Mistake number 1.
Yeah, probably. But just understand that this is out there. That tells you a little bit about the National Cancer Institute's idea of free radicals, what they now know, where reactive oxygen species come from, and I think that's it.